James Coppinger has been involved in professional football since leaving school at 16 years old and is currently 40 years old and still playing for Donny Rovers, where he is a club legend. He has played in every English division, the Premier League, the Championship, League One, League Two, and the National League, inheriting a wealth of knowledge and experience over a 20-plus year period, totaling over 800 competitive games. In 2015, he began a new venture called Pro Mindset, which helps footballers create a better understanding of what mental performance looks like and how it plays an integral part in being both successful on and off the pitch. So James, welcome to the show. And let's start with Pro Mindset. What inspired you to start this whilst also being a professional footballer?
Yeah, great introduction, by the way. I think for me, 24 years as a professional footballer, it's the standout component, sort of the mental performance, psychology, mentality, whatever you want to call it. I changed my mindset around 22, 23 when I met an individual called Terry Gormley while I was at Doncaster. And inspired me to try and help other players. I think it's quite an untapped sort of area. I break it down into the 4-corner model with tactical, technical, physical, and mental. And, at most football clubs, you have the physical, the tactical, and the technical all sorted with sort of fitness coaches, football coaches, managers. But the mental side of it for me is where a lot of players get let down. I've been mentoring and working with players, trying to help them understand what it is and how important it is.
You talked there, James, about how you change your mindset. You were a professional footballer. What were you doing wrong?
I genuinely think that, like, football, and I've had a conversation with somebody today, ironically, that, he says football, and he's 20 years old, and he said football now isn't what I thought it was. When I grew up playing football, enjoying football, now I'm playing as a professional. It's not something that, there's some horrible people involved. There's things that get said that I don't like. And there's so many different variables to professional football and professional sport that, you almost don't get shown how to deal with them. Setbacks, disappointments, injuries, loss of form, the manager doesn't like you, the coaches don't like you, the players are giving you stick. There's so many different things that as you're growing up, you don't have to deal with. But if you don't know how to deal with them, then you're never going to get your best out of yourself, in my opinion.
Yeah, and no one, I imagine, prepares children for that or prepares young pros for that. It isn't part of that education system, as you've alluded to there. So what's missing? What needs to be interjected? What things need to be focused on to support younger players, James?
I think people should be made aware that, setbacks, disappointments, these are all part of professional sport. These are all part of life. And there should be tools, techniques, strategies that are given to younger people to help them deal with them. When I was growing up, when I made a mistake, it was the worst thing ever. But I've been able to, and I did this purposely. I wanted to learn about this to help my kids, to help the people that I love, have a better chance and be successful and be happy. My main motivation from 23 onwards, 22, 23, was to be happy. So I set up sort of strategies and mechanisms and certain things in my life to do that. And I think, from a young person's perspective, if you can realize that when I make a mistake, it's about learning from that mistake and using it and moving forward instead of thinking it's, oh my God, it's the end of the world and moving backwards. I think what I'm doing and what a lot of people are doing when they're talking about mental performance, I think it speeds up development. I think it enhances development. And if you can grasp it at a young age, I think you will see kids develop faster.
And you're talking about development, not just within football, I think, here, aren't you? I read an interesting stat the other day. It's 0.012% of park footballers actually make it to professionals. So you've got a real tiny chance of actually making it. So is there an illusion in what you're saying that actually when you're looking at strategies and mechanisms and failing and allowing failure to be part of the process. You're talking of something bigger than football. You're actually looking at this with a wider lens.
Yeah, it's personal development. It's you as an individual becoming the best you can be, as a communicator, as for me personally, it was a husband, as a father, as a son. And then what I find is that almost you can see a difference on the pitch. You know, if I'm happy in myself, if I'm feeling good about myself and everything else is going on off the pitch, it's going well, then I've always felt like I've been able to perform at my best. But you don't even scratch the surface with a lot of this, because everybody's different. Everybody, what I call a mind map, everybody's brought up differently. Everybody's set out to have sort of people that influence them in different ways. And what I was led to believe when I was younger was that was the way I was and that I couldn't change it. But at 22, when I realized that I could change that, and you know, it was just the way I was thinking that was having the huge bearing on my sort of outcomes on and off the pitch. You know, it changed everything for me.
So to take us back to that, James, that stage when you were about 22, 23, Terry Gormley, is that right? Is that the name of the fellow you had a conversation with? What changed there? What happened?
Yeah, so I didn't go to a school of excellence. I didn't go to an academy. At 16, I got scouted by Darlington, who were in League Two. And 6 months into that YTS, they give me a YTS, a 2-year YTS. 6 months into that, I went for an England trial and travelled to Poland to play for England under 17s with the likes of Joe Cole, Leon Osman, Peter Crouch, Gareth Barry, some fantastic players. And then in the February, I signed for Newcastle for 1.8 million. I made my Premier League debut at 19 under Sir Bobby Robson, and then I got relegated out the Football League at 21. So within 5 years, I'd gone from Sunday League to Premier League to non-league. And, you know, for anybody, that is a lot to take and to try and get your head round. On top of that, my mum and dad divorced at 17, and my granddad, my hero, somebody who I worshipped, who I looked up to, he died. He diagnosed with cancer. So within 6 months, he passed away, and it was the first person that I'd ever lost. So a lot happened to me in a short period of time, and I didn't really have a support network around me. I didn't really know how to cope with it until I met Terry Gormley. Ironically, I didn't know what I was going into, and I didn't know what to expect.
There's a few exit points there that we can take. I'd just like to come back to mindset, and we talk about mindset through the work of the famous lady from America, Carol Dweck, who talks about a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And what you're saying here at 21 and 22, this was before that book came around, and that research was actually at the forefront of what educators are using. Was it Terry that introduced that to you?
Yeah, Terry sort of, again, it was more around, at the time I was performing at the training ground, so I was playing really well, and you know, I couldn't perform on a Saturday. I struggled to replicate what I was doing on the training ground. And Terry had met Dave Penny, the manager, and he said, look, you've got 10 minutes to make me believe in this stuff. And Terry picked his stiff up and went to walk out. And Dave was like, well, where are you going? He went, well, you've called me, and now you're telling me I've got 10 minutes to convince you that this stuff works. And he said, no, just sit down. He said, I've got one player, and if you can work with this player and you can make it work with this player, I'll sort of buy into what you're doing. So I went down to Bellevue, the old stadium at Doncaster, and met him in the boardroom. And within 60 minutes, my first ever session with Terry, it transformed my life completely. And I don't mind saying that.
What did he do, James?
The biggest thing for me was he made me realize, and this is something that always stuck with me, is how you think dictates how you feel. How you feel dictates how you act, and how you act determines your results. So it all starts with how you think. And he made me understand that I could control my thinking and I could change it at any point. So effectively, I was thinking constantly in a negative way. I was doubting myself. I was letting people make decisions for me. There were so many things that were happening that I would look back and analyze and think, oh my God, like that's why that was happening. And that's why I ended up getting relegated out of the league. That's why I ended up doing that. And for me, coming out of that session, I came out and I remember going home, sitting on the worktop in my kitchen and going and saying to my wife, look, everything's changed for me now. Like it was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders and things just went from strength to strength, you know, both on the pitch and off the pitch, in every way, shape or form.
So what you're saying there is changing the narrative away from negativity towards positivity, and that had a total transformation in not just your work life. I'm suspecting your home life as well.
Yeah, and I think accountability, you know, I've been doing this for 17 years now, and accountability is huge. I look at interviews that I did when I first went to Doncaster prior to working with Terry, and I blamed managers, I blamed coaches, I blamed Bobby Robson, I blamed basically everybody but myself. And, you know, a big thing for me was looking in the mirror and starting to be accountable for my actions. So I can make decisions and it's on me. You know, if people wanted, for example, people would be at the club and they were like, are you coming out tonight? And I couldn't say no. Like I felt like I wasn't strong enough in myself to say, no, I don't want to. So I used to say, yeah, I will. And then I used to regret doing what I was doing, whether it was going out having a drink, whether it was going out doing things that I shouldn't be doing. Like that was me sort of letting other people control me. Before games, assistant manager used to say things to me and it used to hurt me. It used to, like, I'd be going on the pitch thinking, right, I'm going to play well today. And he'd say one thing and it would affect my whole performance. So understanding how to filter things, understanding how to control things, understanding how to be accountable. And a huge part of it was Terry talked about a diamond. So we all start as this bright, shiny diamond. And things happen to us in our lives. And, you know, if you don't deal with them, you cover this diamond and it loses its shine, it loses its brightness. And then if you still don't sort of deal with them, you can't see this diamond. And that was me. Like my mum and dad divorcing, my granddad passing away, me getting relegated out of the Football League, all these things that had happened, I just hadn't dealt with them. So we had a really big sort of moment where he asked me to stand up. I was sat on a chair. He asked me to stand up and look at James. So he said, look at James sat on the chair. So he's me standing, looking at me where I just was. And he said, what do you see? What do you see in James? And even now it gives me goosebumps because I was amazed at how far gone I was. Like, sort of lacks confidence, doesn't believe in himself. He feels sorry for himself. All of these things started coming out, and I actually broke down. I actually got upset, and he said to me, "What would James's granddad think?" And again, sort of, I just went completely, and I was like he would feel sad, he would feel disappointed, and all these sort of emotions started coming out of me. And then when I'd left after the first sort of session, it had all gone. Like I'd almost cleared this in a conflict that I'd been fighting with, and I had clear direction and clear focus on where I wanted to be.
Oh. So wow. he really opened a release valve there, and he gave you an opportunity to share all these things. I like the diamond analogy and that idea that Terry's basically put you back in control of yourself and he's held a mirror up to you in many ways and given you the opportunity to see who you are and verbalize that and then start to move forward with it. What I'm really interested in it, and thanks for sharing so much depth and richness with that. What I'm really interested in now is what are the sort of brass tacks or steps that you took that helped you to move away from the old James, the one that you said lacked confidence and feel sorry for himself, towards a James that then went on to have, 17 years more and still counting at the top of his game.
And you know what it was? It was a couple of things. One of the questions was that I actually had this conversation with my son the night before last, around thinking, around like, because I can control my thinking, because I learned to control my thinking, I always ask my question, does it help me? Does it help me thinking in that way? And if the answer is no, then I don't think about it. I move forward. We spoke about like coming to a crossroads, and what I used to do was I used to get to a crossroads and go, I don't know what to do. If I do this, this will happen, and if I do that, that might happen, and what about this happens? And but what I've learned to do is just do it. We spoke about the Nike slogan, just do it, and it was massive for me because now I just do it, and then I know that I'm strong enough to deal with whatever comes. And by coming out my comfort zone, by moving forward, you learn so much and you grow so much. What I was doing was staying in my comfort zone, not wanting to really go anywhere and standing still, if not standing still, going backwards. So I think two things was just doing it and coming out of my comfort zone really took me to the next level. I've played over 800 games, but since I changed my mindset, I played 42 games every season for the past 18 seasons. And, I've had 3 promotions, but I've had 3 relegations. Two of them relegations, we bounced back the first time of asking. I won the cup final in the Millennium Stadium. I played at Wembley in front of 80,000 people, beat Leeds 1-0. Off the pitch, I went to Machu Picchu. So I went to Peru and had a life-changing experience trekking through the Andes. I built my own house. I've done a lot of things that I would have never, ever, ever thought possible when I was 22 years old. And, I'm still doing that. I've got 3 businesses that I run and manage. I'm still a professional footballer, and all these things are because of the way I think, and because I'm constantly growing and wanting to grow as a person.
And that's one of our taglines. It's about being a better human. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. And that personal growth along the way has been absolutely phenomenal. I'm interested with that conversation with your son. I have similar conversations, and it seems to go out of one ear into and out the other.
That's because you're not a professional footballer, Alan.
It's true. Very true. But the crux of it there, you talked earlier about, can we get these messages across to youngsters? Because I myself wish I knew about mindset at 14 and 15 and even beyond. And how could we as educators and as leaders and as professional footballers, how can we get this message across to these kids?
I think personally, and you're right, I think if it's your own son, it's really difficult. Whether you're a professional footballer or not, it's really, really difficult. And I have the same battle as you will have. But I think consistency is the key. Consistent messages, regardless of behaviors, is huge. If you stop because you think your son isn't listening or a certain individual isn't listening, I think you're doing them an injustice. I think personally there'll be a point where they'll pick it up, or they'll feel like, oh my God, I've never heard him say that, when you've probably said it 50 times before. And I've seen that with my kids. So I think consistently saying the same things, maybe trying it in a different way, try to communicate it in a different way, trying to unconsciously deliver it so that they actually don't know what the message is, but they're actually getting it without actually knowing they're getting it. And I think that was a huge learning for me in performance, is conscious and unconscious performance. That was a game changer for me in terms of a strategy that I used. And there's loads of different strategies that you can use, but I think 14 to 16 is an age where if you can slowly drip feed it into people's psyche and into people's sort of mindset, then by the time to get 16, and I've noticed I work with 16 to 18-year-olds quite a lot, and they're starting to sort of want to know more and how to do certain things and how can I deal with this and how can I deal with that. Up until that point, like what you said, Alan, like parents have most of the control. So you, as a kid, you're basically a byproduct of your parents because they make most of the decisions. But when you leave school and get to 16, you have to start making decisions for yourself. And ultimately, you will be judged on what decisions you make.
Yeah, you're so right, and I love that takeaway there about consistent messages, and I just want you to relate that to as a leader in the changing room. Is that something that you're consistently doing all the time with the younger players, just dropping little gems in there? Hopefully they'll you can reel them in. Sometimes they won't listen, but do you feel as if that's your role now as a more senior pro?
I think it's been my role. I captained Doncaster from 34 to probably about 38. And that's always been my role. I felt like that's one of my strengths is to lead by example and unconsciously affect the group. I've never been a ranter and raver. I've never been somebody who shouts and screams, but at the same time, I'd like to think that people look at me and know what sort of standards I set. And like you said, unconsciously drip feeds certain things into the group. And because football has changed, whether you like it or not, the ranters and ravers and, the times when you could absolutely annihilate somebody, you can't do it anymore. These kids are coming through academies in a total different mindset. We've got 23s players from 19 to 21, and we've got a few old school coaches that if they go off on them, you just lose them completely. And you just can't do that anymore.
It's an interesting one that for me and Lewis, who have grown up a little bit old school, council estate. We played a lot of football. I grew up with the Dave Bassett model of football at Sheffield United, where you got Vinnie Jones in dressing room, and if you were a young lad hanging around those dressing rooms, you make yourself scarce, let's say. And we have this conversation, don't we, Lewis, a lot. Are today's generation, and I know Lewis has different agreements with me, are they a little bit too sensitive, or is it just because it's just something that's different? Can they take a good bollocking, for example, or not?
I go back to, I think your manager, your job as a manager is to understand the group. Yeah. So you understand who can do it, who can take it, who can't take it, who needs an arm around the shoulder. I know that's quite a cliche, but that's ultimately what it's about. And whether they can or not, it's irrelevant really, because I go back to it sort of mind maps. A lot of these kids were conditioned to think in a certain way, and a lot of them, or the majority of them, the dynamics have changed. So it's quite a softer approach. It's around education. It's around understanding. And I think when you see the likes of Jurgen Klopp, Pep, Pochettino, the top managers, they're not ranters and ravers. They're people that are quite meticulous in how they do things. And it's a lot around strategy and making people feel good.
Have to be careful what questions you ask Jurgen Klopp, though, don't you? He gets pretty defensive. James, I wanted to touch upon there, what happens on these days for you now? Obviously, you've talked about 22, 23. That was a stark change for you. You're taking that into the dressing room now to try and do what you can do and have done in the past as a captain in terms of developing other players' mindsets. What do you do practically when you're having a bad day? We still have days, don't we, despite trying to be positive, that things look a bit doom and gloom. What bits and pieces do you do to help just get you on an even keel on those days?
You know what? And when I say this, a lot of people think I'm lying or I'm over the top, but I very rarely have a bad day for that reason. I choose not to. I've eliminated a lot of people out of my life that brought me down or made me feel that way. I've eliminated a lot of things that I did that made me feel like that. And I've almost designed my own way of thinking, my own mentality, my own mindset, so that, whenever anything happens in my day, I can deal with it. I know how to deal with it. It doesn't make me feel bad. It doesn't make me feel sad. It doesn't make me feel down. I don't feel sorry for myself. And that's what I've been able to do over 17 years. And, when I tell people that they can do that, and it is possible, a lot of people don't believe me. And I don't like saying it, if I'm being honest. But I'm proud of what I've done and proud of, I'm married. I've been married 13 years and I've got 3 kids. And I genuinely feel like I don't have bad days. That is just bad. It isn't in my vocabulary because it just doesn't happen.
And then you know what, that sounds ace, and there'll be cynics watching this that'll say, well, that's all right for James Coppinger because he's a professional at the top of his game. He plays. He's a footballer. He's living every young man's dream, and he's got some decent cash behind him in 20 years of a career. What's the response to that kind of approach? That you're there and you have that mindset because of the success that you've had.
And that's fair enough. That's people's opinions, and that's what I'm saying. That's why sometimes I don't like saying it, because I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I have faults like everybody else, but you know what? I'm honest with myself. I'll go back to the accountability thing. Like, I look myself in the mirror. If I have any problems or anyone has a problem with me, I'm up front and say, look, how can I help? And if it's my wife, if it's my mum, if it's my dad, if it's my kids, I'll say, like, how can I change? How can I help you? But for a lot of people, I'm not really that bothered. For the majority of people who aren't involved with me every single day, my teammates, yeah, if you ask my teammates, I'd like to think that they'd say I'm a positive guy and I try and help everybody within the team and in the group. But I do have things. I like you say, I built my own house. I put myself under pressure with businesses. It's not all plain sailing. When I come home, I pick my kids up. I've got so many different things going on that it's not like that at all. But I enjoy the challenge. Every single day I enjoy the challenge. Every single day I wake up and I have perspective on my life. I've lost both my granddads, my nana, my grandma's in a home at the minute. I lost my mother-in-law. So what I learned when I lost my granddad, and I found it really difficult, is I celebrated the people that I lost in their lives and how fortunate I am. And I know I sound like I'm going off on one here, but I celebrated how fortunate I am to have what I've got. And I'm really, really grateful for what I've got. So how could I wake up and sort of feel sorry for myself, or, when things are going, or things do get harder, or I have a bad day at training, I've designed things to counteract that. Like, as soon as I drive out the training ground, so if I've had a bad training session, as soon as I drive out the training ground, that stays there. So I've learned to keep James Coppinger, the footballer, at the training ground. So when I'm driving home, like, I become James Coppinger, who's in charge of Kicks Middlesbrough and Kicks Redcar, the Zenit Group, Pro Mindset, and the father. And then when I drive back in the next day, I drive in as James Coppinger, the footballer, and I start to think about what I need to do and how I need to do it. So I've learned to strategize certain parts of my life so that it doesn't overwhelm me.
What are the support systems that help you to do that, James? What do you need to call upon to be able to do that? Is there a daily routine you have? Are there certain people that you need to speak to? Or is this all something that's done really individually and in a very solo sort of basis?
No, I have a partner who I work with one of my franchises, who's really, really good. I purposely sort of went into business with him because he's exactly like-minded as me. He doesn't really see any problems in anything. It's more trying to get solutions. So again, trying to choose the right people I could go back to. If I was going with one of my friends who I've known all my life, but really don't get on with him, and he drags me down and he makes me feel a certain way, I just wouldn't do that. I've learned not to do that. So I've gone with somebody who I feel like is very similar to myself. My agent and best friend, I speak to him all the time. Very like-minded, had to retire at 24. He worked with Terry as well, ironically. And he's become one of the best agents in the country, works for the biggest agency in the country in Stella. And I speak to him a lot. I'd probably say he's one of my mentors. I speak to Terry quite a bit. I write a lot of things down. So I'm constantly writing things down in terms of what I need to do, how I need to do them. I set goals, I set targets. And the biggest thing I think is I have time where I do nothing. where I can rest, where I can sort of, it might be 3-4 hours on a night where I can watch football, where I can spend time with my kids, where I can just do absolutely nothing. And that's probably the best thing that I've ever done is do that, because I think it's massive.
And you find that time of doing nothing, you talked in really simple terms there about, trying to leave James Coppinger, the footballer at the training ground, trying to bring a business head on when you have your business deals, bringing your father head on when you're home to be a father. How do you switch off? You are a busy man, as you've said, 3 children, 3 businesses, and a football club that worship you and adore you for the efforts and the success that you've brought them through the years. How do you sit on an evening and switch off?
It's easy, and it's something that for a lot of people they struggle with. Because I know it helps me, and because I enjoy doing it, is because it's how I do it. I just, it's probably one of the things that I've always been good at. There's times when I do sit down and think I should be doing this or I should be doing that, but I know that the right thing to do is, especially if we've had a game and in between sort of a Saturday and a Saturday, or we've had a Saturday and a Tuesday, I think it's always good to just do nothing. Rest and sleep is huge for anything. But again, I go back to it. I've almost designed a certain way of doing things and it works for me. And then if things, when I do retire from football and I have to sort of rejig everything and almost find a new structure for how I'm going to do things, that's when sort of, I'd sort of speak to other people and almost, if I'm not sure of something, I'll go and ask somebody who I value, who's been there and seen it and done it. And I read a lot of books as well and listen to a lot of podcasts. Like Alan said, I think that's huge. And I've done that probably for the last 10 years.
Give us some examples, James, of the books that you're really into and your podcast, just for our viewers.
Yeah, I really like Tony Robbins. He was massive for me when I started out at like 22, 23. To listen to some of his things and to know that this isn't this weird and wonderful thing that people make it out to be. I talk about, because mindset and psychology, you can't see it, it's invisible. People are so reluctant to understand what it is and buy into it. You listen to Tony Robbins on YouTube, you listen to some of his podcasts, his books, read his books. He's just on a different planet. And again, I just think I would advise anybody who's never heard of him or listened to him to go out and listen to some of his stuff, because I think it's life-changing sort of stuff. The Secret, so, around the law of attraction. I'm a huge believer in the law of attraction. After reading The Secret, it pieced a lot of things together for me in terms of, I'm big on visualization. I visualized the goal that I scored this season. I've done it in the past, and it's almost like if you can learn to sort of understand what it is and how to do it, then I think it's a game changer as well. Shoe Dog was a big book for me, around Nike, the owner of Nike, his journey and where he started out and when he became sort of a billionaire. It was just an absolute game changer, in terms of listening to his experiences and how much he valued the journey, the process. He became a billionaire and he said, I'd trade in every single penny to go back to the beginning and relive that journey. And for me, it's huge. I talk about it all the time with people, with players, is they want instant gratification. They want to get to the end. And like, for me, it's like, you don't need to get to the end. You want to enjoy every single minute of every single day, as a professional footballer and as a person. That's what you're striving for, is to do that, enjoy moments that for a lot of people they're insignificant, but for me it isn't the way. And it's sort of, when you read books like that, it rubber stamps what I'm already thinking.
Yeah, I totally agree about the process and the journey. It really is something to savor. Let me give you a scenario, James. Your gaffer brings you in and he says, look, Cops, I've got this young pro, very talented, but, and that's where the big but comes in, don't work hard. really negative, fixed mindset, not a nice character around a change room, influence others. He's out on the town all the time. How can you just spend some time with him? Where do you start with that?
And in the scenario you've given me is a scenario I get all the time. Because the majority of clubs, the majority of managers would just say, get rid of him.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I feel like if I was going to invest money in a player, if I was a football club and I was going to invest money in a player, I think a lot of players get let down because, you know, there's so many different factors, and we've said it, that can sway a footballer. And a lot of the time it's you get left to your own devices. And if you can't deal with it, if you have 2 or 3 bad games, it's like, right, next. At some football clubs, it's right, next. Who's do you know what I mean? Whereas I think for me, it's about finding out why that player is doing what he's doing. Find out that player, what does he think? What motivates him? What's important to him? What makes him happy? Find out all these things and build a relationship with him. Because what I've found is that the majority of football players want to do well. The majority of players are professional footballers and they want to do well. A lot of the time, they're either thinking in the wrong way, they're either letting other people affect them, or it's too much for them. And again, I work with players from 16 to 35. And, you know, I've worked with a 25-year-old player who has been institutionalized and been in an academy from the age of 7, and he doesn't know anything else. So he's got to a stage now where he's like, he's got to the end of the road in terms of he's struggling a little bit. He's been at Premier League clubs, and then he's at a club now where he's thinking, oh my God, what's next for me? He's got 2 kids and he's starting to have a little bit of a realization, but nobody's helped him. Like, nobody's made him realize there's more to life than just football. And I've actually not feel sorry for him, but, you know, it's sad because he's been let down, in my opinion, by so many different people. And I think, you know, if you can support players, if you can put what I'm suggesting to clubs is that you put in development plans for players, not just in the academy, but at every single age. And then you've got a better chance of making them a success.
What's going to change clubs' focus on this, James, and make them do some of these things you're suggesting? Because like you quite rightly identified there, it's a really cutthroat business. You know, 99.9% of players at a club in an academy will never even pull on the shirt for the first team and play in a professional game. So why should clubs start to invest and care about these individuals? And why shouldn't it just be a sort of revolving door of, well, he's bother or he's too much hassle, let's just get someone else in? What's going to change that sort of pattern that we're seeing?
I think it's starting to change. I genuinely do. I spoke to Liverpool in the summer, Alex Inglethorpe, their academy manager, and their first team psychologist who I'd worked with. And they said to me that this part of football is at the forefront of everything they do. From Jurgen Klopp as the manager to the academy, it runs all the way through it. So they have things in place, strategies, procedures that help players with the mental side of the game. And I genuinely feel like it's slowly changing. It's slowly, people are starting to see the importance of mindset, mentality. You know, you'd be amazed at the amount of parents, the amount of kids, the amount of players that I speak to that don't understand that they can change their mindset, that they can change their thinking to change their results. And I had a parent say to me the other week, well, it'd be amazing if you could change the way he thinks. And I went, what do you mean? And he was like, I said, did you not think he could change the way he thinks? And he was like, no. And I was like, like, this is the level that you're at. This is where some people are at in terms of they just go on and do the same things over and over again and expect a different result. And that is never, ever, ever going to happen. You have to change. You have to start by changing your thinking. You have to start by doing things differently, and then things will change for you. And that's where I think it's huge. You know, I go back to the message that you sent me, educating people, educating younger people. And I think if we can educate people from 14 to 18 now, and I think then slowly, you know, as they get into the 20s and 30s, they'll be better prepared for whatever comes. You know, if they're getting released, if they're getting better contracts. You know, I've recently wrote a book and it's been forwarded by Sir Kenny Dalglish, and we spoke about what I'm doing, and I said, look, you have to deal with disappointment. And he said, yeah, but you also have to deal with success. He said, I was in the best Liverpool team and the best Celtic team, and we constantly had to deal with success. We constantly had to deal with churning out performance, churning out result. And, you know, as much as people talk about dealing with disappointment, a lot of people that I've played with can't deal with success.
That's a great point. And when you're dealing with human beings, they only know what they know. So if they've not read that, or they've not been taught that, how are they supposed to even know that exists? And that's where you come in, isn't it? With your pro mindset business, is putting it out there and getting this sort of viewpoint, saying that it's actually, this is a pathway you can choose.
100%. And I call it a professional mindset. You know, you're a professional footballer, you're a professional athlete. And what people's perceptions are is that it's about ability. That's all it's about. But for me, it's more about having a professional mindset. It's all about how you think, because it starts with that. I talk about an invisible foundation. You know, nobody can see it, but you know, if you have a foundation of tools, techniques, strategies, coping mechanisms, way of dealing with things, then for me, it filters into the physical, it filters into the technical, it filters into the tactical. You know, if you're not in the right mindset, if you're not thinking in the right way, then you're never, ever going to get the best out of all the different areas. So for me, going into clubs, working with players, you know, I did a Premier League first team, Scottish Premier League first team this season. I did a presentation via Zoom with the full team around mental performance, and I was absolutely amazed at how many didn't know or have ever done anything like this before.
How many of them were really into it, James? How many people were really into it? How many people were sat there because they had, you know, they were told by their gaffer they needed to sit on and listen?
I genuinely think it's really difficult when you're on Zoom it's probably one of the hardest to do, but they were all engaged. At the end, we did the Q&A that lasted about 25 minutes, and I'd say probably 7 or 8 of them asked questions that were related to the presentation. And when I'm looking on Zoom and I'm seeing them, I genuinely felt like they were engaged in it. I'm working with a couple of the players after that presentation, and you know, it was really, really beneficial for me, because you know, if I can do it in front of that many people, that many players that you think, Jesus, who is this guy and what is he talking about? And they're benefiting from it, and they're sort of starting to think about it. Even if one player, in my opinion, takes something from that presentation, then I feel like that I've done my job.
Yeah, for sure. And you didn't have to deal with any cameras being off and kids playing games while they should be listening.
No, not at that point. But yeah, and again, like I think it's not ideal on a Zoom format. You know, it would be brilliant to sit in a room and to go through it with everybody, but I actually like it. You know, it's taken my business to the next level in terms of I can sit, and I do it on evenings. You know, players, it's not on the phone and it's not in person, so it's a little bit in between. And players have been really receptive to it. You know, I can share my screen, I can go through presentations, and I can build a relationship in this sort of format. And I think it's been really, really good.
It's very interesting because it's not just applicable to professional footballers, this, James. This is applicable to employees across the world, to leaders across the world. And I think what you've touched upon really well today is the value of relationships. And particularly, there's that perception of professional footballers. They're just almost like robots and machines, and they're not. They're just humans playing football. That just happens to be their job. And how important is it? You've touched upon it slightly with relationships. How important is that feeling of self-worth in an individual to get them performing at their best?
It's massive. It's the biggest thing in my experience. at all levels. So again, it's one of the reasons why I did it, because it's exactly the same in the Premier League as it is in the National League. Even more so in the National League to an extent, because a lot of the players at that level don't believe they should be playing higher, or they're not professional enough and they don't do things right. But it starts with their thinking. There's so many players that you see from the National League that have gone on and played in the Premier League, the likes of Harry Maguire, Jamie Vardy, Jordan Hugel's an example, who I played with he was at Gisborough. He got a move to West Ham and now he's playing at Norwich. He went to Middlesbrough QPR. These players, it's all about their thinking. You listen to Jordan Hugel talk and he constantly talks about he never give up. He never give up thinking. He always thought he was going to make it. His mum would question what he was doing. Like, why are you still thinking that you're going to be a professional footballer? You need to go to college and do this and this and this. And he was like, no, I'm going to make it. I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it. And because his mindset was so fixed on what he wanted to do, in my opinion, he went and achieved it. So I think self-worth is the biggest thing in football. It's the biggest thing in life. You know, whether you're 40 years old or whether you're 16, you like to hear, well done. You like to hear, you've been brilliant today. And I'm no different. You know, with the managers that I've had in the last 3 or 4 years, whenever they've said that to me, it's made me feel really, really good.
Yeah, that it's a really powerful thing. And sometimes as leaders in a variety of circles, you can often forget that amongst the busyness of the day. Just that little thank you, just for doing something, that gratitude, it is so important.
I think I'd add to that as well, James. Obviously, you being at one club for so long, it is rare for a footballer, isn't it? You don't get too many one-club footballers these days. How have you found those challenges with managers coming in and out, changes of leadership? How have you seen how those have impacted on the changing room? What have you done to sort of manage that process and support some of the players in that process?
Yeah, it's been really, really, well, it's a good question. And it was tough. You know, I had Dave Penny to start with, and then he gave me my opportunity. He introduced me to Terry, and then he lost his job and Sean O'Driscoll came in. And under Sean, he was the perfect person for me at I was probably 25 and he was there for 5 years. We got promoted. We won at Wembley. We won the FL Trophy at the Millennium Stadium. We were in the Championship for 4 seasons. And I absolutely loved him. Like, he taught me so much as a person. He was a striver. He was constantly trying to test the group. And then Dean Saunders came in, and that was interesting. We had the experiment. We had Elhadj Diouf, Pascal Chimbonda. We had sort of 10 French players come in. And the total different dynamic. You know, we based everything that for 5 years under Sean around team spirit, team togetherness, leadership, taking responsibility. Under Dean, it was the opposite. So it was, you don't say anything, I'm going to tell you what to do. We had players flying in from Paris. We had a lad living in Paris who flew in on a match day, and he played every week. And we had lads turning in that, you know, just didn't want to be there. They were there just for the money. And that was really, really difficult. Then Darren Ferguson came in, who I really, really liked, but he came in around when, Paul Dickoff came in, who again, not much structure, an ex-player who never really managed, and we got promoted to the Championship and he got the job. And then we got relegated on goal difference. And I believe it was based on, you know, the small detail, that day-to-day stuff that we didn't sort of do under Paul. Darren Ferguson came in after that, and I was 34, and he got me and Richie Wellens into the office and said, look, there's only one place. You're both 30, 34, 35. There's only place for one of you, basically. And I saw that as a challenge, because I felt really good, and I always like to prove people wrong. And the season after he came in, I ended up getting team of the season. I got player of the season, scored 10, set up 15. I got nominated for player of the league at the PFA Awards, and had a great relationship with him, and still have a great relationship with him now. Grant McCann came in, stripped me of the captaincy, and told me that basically that I wouldn't play many games this season. He dropped me for the first 2 games. I got in on the 3rd game. I played 52 games, and we missed out on the playoff semi-final on penalties against Charlton. And I got player of the season that season as well. So for me, it's always been, I've always used it as a motivation to prove people wrong. Ever since I was a kid, when I got let go by Middlesbrough for being too small, I almost used it as, you know what, I want to prove that I am good enough, and I will do this and I will do that. And that's the way I've worked throughout my whole career.
It's amazing hearing the different leadership styles. It's just unbelievable the differences you get. And I mean, you'll take that forward and you'll have learned something from everybody. Give us your top 3 tips for being a really good leader. And it doesn't have to be football related. It could be in any context, James.
Personally, I think authenticity is the biggest thing. You know, I was manager under Bobby Robson, and him giving my Premier League debut, like I said, at 19. And he was one of the most authentic, genuine people you'll ever meet. And you could see it. He was 60, 66, 67 when he was manager in Newcastle when I was there. And him coming into the training ground every single day, giving absolutely everything. He absolutely loved what he did. He didn't hold a grudge. He was warm. And yeah, I think authenticity is huge. You know, trying to be somebody you're not, trying to do things that don't suit you. I think people see right through it eventually. And I've had managers where that's been the case. You're almost trying to be a manager. So that'd be one. I think, again, going back to building relationships and trust is huge. You know, finding out what people are about. Darren Ferguson was a master at it. You know, delving deep into people's sort of lives and finding out. He still sends messages to me now saying, I hope the family's well. And obviously having Sir Alex as his dad, he's
picked up a lot along the way, hasn't he?
Well, he's learned from the best, and he also spoke to me about mistakes he's made when he went to Preston, and he basically dug out all the senior pros there, and he said, my dad after that said to me, look, don't go looking for trouble, don't go looking for conflict, because conflict will find you 100%. So you don't have to actually go and look for it. So he was one of the best that I've come across in terms of building relationships with players. The third one probably would be find out what you want to do or how you want to play, a philosophy, a almost ethos, and stick with it. There's so many managers that I've worked with that chop and change constantly. I know it probably depends on the club. It probably depends on how much time you get. But for a lot of managers that I've worked with, you know, if you get a bad result, it's like, right, we'll scrap that and we'll move on to the next one. And we've had a bad result, we'll scrap that and we'll move on to the next one. But for me, I think being consistent, finding the way you want to play and working with your players and making it sort of black and white, so there's no grey areas, I think is huge.
Yeah, quality.
It's very similar, isn't it, Lewis, in schools where you get initiatives thrown at you, and really you just want one way. You want a vision, you want a philosophy, you want a why. You want to know why people's why is, and you want people to be authentic, don't you? And I think that's the key that you've absolutely nailed there. We're going to wind it down a bit now, James, with our quick fire questions at the end, and we like to start off with 3 leaders in world history, dead or alive, that you'd love to go out for a meal with.
Wow, good question. 3 leaders, as in what? As in world leaders, as in prime ministers, as in
anyone you want.
Anyone. It could be prime ministers, presidents, religious leaders, footballers, whatever you want.
I think a big one for me would be Sir Alex. You know, I met him at the training ground, and he has this aura about him that you can imagine. Probably arguably the most successful manager of all time. And just to sort of pick his brain on on how he was being so successful. It's amazing. Sort of, I think momentum was huge when he was at Man United. I think he had good players, but I genuinely feel like he was a good delegator. So he delegated really, really well, and his staff were really, really good. So he'd be one that I'd love to sit down with.
James, we've asked this question before, James, actually, about Sir Alex gets mentioned a lot. And I like to come in on this and say, do you think his methods would be successful now?
I don't think they would be. But again, I go back to sort of what we were saying before. Football has changed. And I think he had a strong dressing room, the likes of Roy Keane, Gary Neville, Rio Ferdinand, and it almost every single season or every single sort of chapter, he had a really strong dressing room that bought into the Man United way of playing. And you could see as soon as he left that all sort of came tumbling down, and they're still trying to find some sort of replacement now. But I don't think that would work in these days. I think for me, the second one would be Brian Clough. And we talk about the way Sir Alex did things, and you could go back probably 20 years and go, the way Brian Clough did things. But I was brought up, Desi Clough and Brian Clough are from Middlesbrough, and I supported Forest as a kid and watched Brian Clough's teams and watched him go about his business. And then I've watched so many documentaries and spoke to players about him, and talk about authenticity. Like, you couldn't get a more authentic person than Brian Clough. And talk about building relationships. I think it was Mark Crossley who spoke about, recently about when he'd made his debut, and he actually didn't tell him he was having his debut until 45 minutes before the game kicked off, because he didn't want him to worry about it. And he was a one-off, and there's not many people that sort of, again, you wouldn't be able to do that these days. I think Jurgen Klopp and Pep are the types of managers that sort of emulate what he's like.
Didn't Cloughie make Crossley go and play for his son's Sunday League team after or something like that?
And end of that first week, I think he played against Liverpool and Newcastle, and then he played for his Brian Clough's son's Sunday League team, didn't he? That's the story.
Yeah, and I think when I think he made him sign a contract with nothing on it. To basically say, look, do you want to play for me or not? And then he eventually filled it in, and he ended up buying him a car. I think in them days you used to have to ask the manager if you could get a car, and he ended up giving him his daughter's car, I think. But go back to the authenticity. Like, he is one of a kind, and he'd definitely be somebody that I'd love to sort of speak to.
Ferguson and Klopp. Who's the third one?
I've gone with managers, and I think Klopp, for me personally, I support. Well, I say I support. I watch Liverpool. I went to Anfield in January to watch Sheffield United play Liverpool with my kids, and the atmosphere and just everything about the club at the time is unbelievable, and it's all down to him, in my opinion. Just the mentality, the love he has for the group, the way he comes across. And I think the contrast of the three managers, it would be really good to find out more about why they do what they do, and how they've got to where they are. For Klopp, he's almost starting, not a trend, but a way of managing. He's changed the mold, if you like, and especially in this country, when he's cuddling people, and when he first came and they were all behind the goal, and I think they drew a game and they were all like doing this behind the goal, and like people were like, what is this guy doing? But he's changed the mentality. There's so many players at the lower leagues now, or managers and coaches, that are doing that, and it's all down to him, in my opinion.
Tell you what,
to be fair, Cox, I think that Cloughie would get you all in that dining room. You'd have a conversation, and then you decide that he was right, wouldn't you?
Imagine trying to decide on a bottle of wine or which beer you're going to have on the table with them three. Absolutely no chance. I also like how we've moved on in terms of our relationship and trust together as well, because I've heard Alan slip in a Cops 2 or 3 times now. Best mates.
I love it, Al.
Listen, Cops, I've got a couple of ones football related from me for the quick fire ones, just for football fans that are listening, and as Donny Rovers fans probably in particular. What's the favourite game you've ever played in?
It's between two. I mean, personally, I scored a hat-trick in the semi-final. You know, it was a huge turning point for me against Southend on Sky. Beautiful night. We'd missed out on promotion on the last day of the season. We had to win to go up, and we got beat. So we went into the playoffs, and I scored a hat-trick that got us to Wembley, and then we beat Leeds 1-0. So personally, that would be probably one of the best performances that I've ever had. But as a collective, Brentford, when I scored on the last day of the season, when we went up as champions, last kick of the season, on the last day of the season, to go up as champions, it doesn't get much better than that.
Was that the one where they had was it a penalty and it went up the other end straight from it?
Yeah, so we needed a draw and they needed to win to get promoted. And there was a penalty in the 90th minute, and they had an argument on who was going to take it. The lad Marcel Trotter, who was on loan, he took it. He hit the bar, and then it broke, and we cleared it. And one of our lads picked it up, ran the full length, squared it, and I tapped it in. And then I think Michael Oliver was the referee on the day. I threw my shirt in the crowd, and I had to put somebody else's shirt on. I walked onto the pitch, and he blew the whistle. And then, yeah, Bournemouth went up second, and we won the league. So it was an unbelievable day.
That is quality. What a day to remember. Who was your favourite player you've ever played with?
Again, between two, it'd have to be Alan Shearer. Although I've sort of made my debut and partnered him up front, but trained with him a lot. The leading Premier League scorer of all time, and Billy Sharp, who, again, I go back to sort of mentality. You're talking about two out-and-out goal scorers that believed every single time they went on a football pitch that they were going to score a goal. And for me, as an attacking midfielder who likes and gets a lot of satisfaction out of setting up goals, they're the type of players you want in your team. So to be fortunate enough to play with both of them and see how they work and operate, it has to be them two. And
they've bagged a few between them, haven't they? Billy Sharp's the leading Football League scorer of all time, right? And Shearer, the leading Premier League scorer. In good company.
And like you say, I'm still friends with Billy, and I'm still trying to get him to Doncaster to finish his career, but I don't think he's going to.
He can stay where he is, Billy. We love him. Last one from me, on the football specific one. James, who's the toughest player you've played against? Who's your toughest opponent?
I think Stuart Pearce. Remember Stuart Pearce? When I signed at Newcastle, my dad, on the first day I signed for Newcastle, my dad said to me, "Whatever you do, do not nutmeg Stuart Pearce." Because I was going through a phase of nutmegging people, and on the first day we did 5-a-sides, and Sir Kenny trained with us, and the ball came to me, and I nutmegged Stuart Pearce, and I was 17, and I didn't think anything of it. And then the next time I got the ball, he went absolutely straight through me.
Welcome to Newcastle.
Yeah, welcome to Newcastle. He also, like, on my first day, like, shook my hand and, like, you know, all the best in your career, son, and almost broke my hand. So I'd have to say Stuart Pearce as well. Growing up, 1990 World Cup, you know, watching it as a 9-year-old boy, sort of looking at him, you know, psycho, and then having to play against him. Yeah, it was definitely Stuart Pearce.
Fantastic. And we'll finish off with our last question, and it's very appropriate for all we've talked about. What does infinite learning mean to you, James?
That's a very good question. Infinite learning is what I've learned to almost implement within my own life. I think when I spoke about coming out your comfort zone, it's something that I never used to do. And I think for me personally, every single day you have an opportunity to learn and to grow and to improve as a person. And again, I don't like saying it, but you know, I don't want to feel like I'm talking about almost going over the top with it, but that's the way I look at it. And I think infinite learning, that's what it's about. I think growing as a person, improving as a person, trying to become a better person, but looking yourself in the mirror and not trying to be somebody else. That's huge in learning. So for me, it's about trying to be a better person. And there's as you can tell, I'm a little bit reluctant in saying that, but there's nothing wrong with feeling like that, because for a lot of people, when I was growing up, people would laugh at you or make fun of you. But nowadays, I think it's slowly becoming, acceptable to say that and to think that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be a better person. There's nothing wrong to want to be a better human being and be happy and help other people. And for me, that's what infinite learning is about. And again, I don't want to come across as if I don't have any faults or I'm perfect, because that isn't me. But that's how I look at infinite learning.
Yeah. No. Cheers, James. That's great. And I'm just looking at my notes there, and I'd be devastated if I didn't ask it. It's up there on the importance list. England under-17s in the same team as Joe Cole, Leon Osman, etc. And you mentioned Peter Crouch. Was he that tall at 16 years old?
He definitely was. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe he played football, if I'm being honest. I remember at Lillishall going for my breakfast and meeting him for the first time and almost looking at him thinking, like, how is that even possible? How is he ever going to play football? But he was a hell of a player, and he had a hell of really good control, really good feet for a big lad. But yeah, he was that tall when he was 16.
That is madness, isn't it? Absolute madness. James, we're going to bring you to an end. Before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can learn a little bit more about you or read about some of the things that you're doing?
Yeah, so I have a website that's just been launched last month, promindset.co.uk, where we explain more around mental performance, what we offer in terms of mentorship. We have the Pro Mindset Club that we're launching in June, and yeah, it's for me, it's a website where you can go on and browse and you can definitely learn more about what pro mindset looks like, what mental performance looks like, and how important it is.
Belting. Cheers. Listen, I thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. We've gone all over the place, haven't we, with it, and covered all sorts of topics. But thanks a lot for coming on, James. Thoroughly enjoyed it. My pleasure. It was really good meeting you both. And like I said before, I think you do an unbelievable job. And I don't want to patronise you, but that's what it's all about for me, trying to educate the younger generation, if you like. Thanks, James. And the older generation. I search Infinite Leaders Live on YouTube and IGTV. We're also on all popular podcast platforms. And remember to check us out at theinfinitelearners.com. Excuse me. Please leave us a review, press subscribe, and let us know how you're getting on with our podcast and the things you're enjoying. Until next time, we'll see you. And thanks a lot, James, for joining us.